points are as follows. That
so I would like, yes. So I'll just formally introduce.
Yeah.
Yes. So just give me a few minutes.
Yeah.
Yes. So a very good evening to everyone from India, and good morning to colleagues in the United States. On behalf of Impact and Policy Research Institute and the University of Idaho, I, Simi Mehta, welcome you all to the International Web Policy Talk on Evolving Paradigm of Higher Education amidst the coronavirus pandemic. As we are all aware that the pandemic has brought innumerable challenges to students and educators in different measures, it is important to discuss how this great human tragedy could bring about changes in higher education. In fact, just an hour back, major reforms in primary, secondary, and higher education have been introduced by the government of India with a new, which has come out with a new education policy, wherein the education is to be made fully inclusive, equitable, and by incorporating the use of technology. So India's Ministry of Human Resource Development has been renamed as the Ministry of Education now. We have a very distinguished panel this evening to deliberate on the above. For the first round of opening comments and remarks, the panelists will have 5 minutes each, which will be followed by the second round, where the panelists would share their reflections and concerns on various aspects of COVID-19 impacting higher education. And then we'd move forward with the way forward. Without taking much time, I thank you all for joining us this evening. And I would like to invite Professor Manisha Priyam to make her opening remarks. Professor Manisha Priyam has a doctorate from the London School of Economics and Political Science in International Development. She is currently an associate professor at the Department of Educational Policy, National University of Educational Planning and Administration, New Delhi. Professor Priyam has over 2 decades of experience of working with donors, policymakers, administrators, and stakeholders in policy formulation, implementation, and evaluations. Her areas of research specialization include higher education policy reforms, primary education policy reforms, decentralization, and urban social policy reforms. She has over 5 dozen research publications to her credit. We are so grateful that Madam could join us today. So Professor Priyam, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invite to IMPRI. Thank you for this very wonderful introduction. I should begin by saying that I deserve none of this, and often such illustrious words preceding me are basically to be attributed to the gift of those who speak so well, and not to me at all. Dr. Arjun, thank you very much for the invite. Dr. Simi, thank you very much once again for the introduction. I'll head straight into the thematic that you have for this evening and set the tone today. And as I see it, whatever the topic of discussion, I think what you're trying to put together is that does the coronavirus pandemic create a critical juncture and a tectonic shift in terms of what we are as human societies and what we are as states that these societies have built in terms of their provisions for higher education. So it's a society question, it's a state society question. And I think what we are basically trying to answer is that whatever existed, it's like the Anno Domini moment, whatever existed before Christ, is there something where there is a disruption, there's a critical juncture that is leading us to think afresh in terms of higher education? Now here, I'll tell you that however much societies pretend that, oh, there's a crisis, there's a disruption, the societies continue with very deep structural tendencies, and especially with respect to higher education, that are there anyways. And that has a lot to do with the manner in which institutions for higher education take a long time to set up, take an even longer time for access to be built for the socially and economically weaker sections to get in, and it takes even longer if you're trying to think of reforms. So something that is by definition the higher education scenario, and when I'm telling you all this, I'm looking at the examples for instance from from the US, which India at this point, or all rankings, so to say that the best exists in the US. And these examples pick up any history of American higher education book and they go back to the 16th century. Institutions that top the rankings have a history of 200, 400 years. And these institutions have seen crises, have seen pandemics. So what constitutes the critical juncture for India in terms of the coronavirus pandemic is twofold. It's not the virus that's leading to the critical juncture. It's the fact that higher education as an institution is just so immediately embedded in our society that's so important for us to relook and understand. For the first time, just before the corona struck, the virus was standing at the doors, but large numbers of first generation learners were joining hands with our higher education institution. And these were happening in geographies far away from what we see or where we come together. Even on your webinar, for example, we've gone horizontal, we've connected multi-countries and welcome all the participants who are there from other countries. But the reality of Indian higher education started ticking in the heartlands of Indian geography, especially those states and those geographies to the north of the Vindhyas. The Balaghat College became very important. So did a college in Samastipur become very important. A new central university in Gaya becomes important. Something in Himachal Pradesh becomes very important. But alongside, what you find is that old universities, such as the University of Kolhapur, colleges in Nanded, in Nashik, in Latur, they all become very important. So what is very important is that just before the pandemic struck, this was a moment of welcome to the world of higher education. India is what is called by economists in cliched terms, India is massifying. We were opening the gates. We were letting them in. We were embracing our own inequalities. But the pandemic strikes and we said, look, we can't look at higher education as a physical facility alone. It needs to move two ways. And remember, I say this, I will use this idea of two ways when I come back at the next round. For this round, I will complete my statements with two comments to you, that this two-pronged means two things. It doesn't mean that education in India needs to be given on web screens, because higher education and curricular reforms in higher education especially are all about giving a cohort experience to a group of youth who are able to come together on a physical site. Remember, all over the world, higher education is built on land grants. So people were not fools, or people didn't understand. Kabutar ki chitti say you can't have a pigeon taking a letter and you can't have that. So land grants still remain important. The physically tied asset of higher education still remains important. But digitalization, the much touted word about which we understand nothing, we create a portal and say, we don't want to look at the back end. The back end of the digital is a knowledge word. So higher education still remains the story of embracing your own society with its inequalities, inequalities of social class, but also inequalities of geography, which are very important for higher education. Higher education still remains about the learning world that must back end what is called the digitalization portal. And that brings us back to saying that higher education needs to be then embedded in a discourse of critical social sciences, the critical liberal social sciences, more than anything else. That's the core of higher education. Anything in terms of technical, professional, vocational, they form the peripheries, and we need to revive what's called the project of the public universities, which is not simply an idea. Clark Kerr calls it the use of the university. Somebody other Brinks calls it in the UK the soul of the university. And Newman, of course, called it the idea of the university. I believe that the real idea of the public university lies somewhere else in between, as an idea, as a use, and as a soul, and in its civic engagement and civic embeddedness in people and societies. So I'd like to close the first round. Thanks once again, and cheers to my co-panelists today. I'm glad to look forward to hearing from you now.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for highlighting that across history and with time, there has been many such moments, and this institution across the geography, also the ubiquitous nature of higher education is important. And very important point raised by Professor Manisha Priyam, that earlier it was used to tied with land grants and other supports. Now also in the digitalization age. Now there is talk of digital divide, and universities and these higher education institutions now also need, I would say, technology grant. So thank you, ma'am, for highlighting. And Simi, we can, yes, move to the next panel.
Yes, yes. So thank you, ma'am. I now invite Professor Cliff Zintgraff. Professor Cliff Zintgraff is a computer scientist, educational technologist, and an entrepreneur who believes in guided inquiry learning and brings it with enthusiasm to secondary and higher education and industry training. He joins us from Texas, and he recently completed 10 years leading innovation, regional development, and STEM education programs for the IC Institute at the University of Texas at Austin. In fact, IMPRI has been incubated by the IC Institute, led by Dr. Cliff at the American Center in New Delhi. Professor Cliff is now an executive director of the San Antonio Museum of Science and Technology, a museum and science and STEM education center in San Antonio, Texas, which serves around 10,000 students a year in educational programs, working with local government and industry partners. His most recent book is on STEM in the Technopolis, The Power of STEM Education in Regional Technology Policy, which is published by Springer. Professor Cliff, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mehta, Dr. Simi. I appreciate the wonderful introduction, and it's good to join you all. Let me just do a quick mic check, make sure you're hearing me okay. Excellent. Excellent. That's, again, thank you for the invitation and for that brief introduction. Indeed, I have a new book out edited with colleagues called STEM in the Technopolis. And this is the part of the topic I was asked to cover, but I'm also going to talk about more generally what's going on with the coronavirus pandemic and higher education in Texas. And I should say that good afternoon to all of you from Texas. Good morning for me, actually. The theme of my comments is going to be the following. It's easy to see what you've lost, and it's hard to see what you've gained. And I think we are all feeling some sense of loss from the pandemic. I know I have not been to my office very frequently over the last 4 months. I've not had the opportunity to interact with the students that we interact with regularly at the museum. There's something lost in the inability to have that kind of physical interaction to be able to work with people. But I think there are some things we've gained that may not be immediately clear to us. And I'm going to talk about a couple of examples that I've had just in the last 4 months. Before I do that, let me mention to everyone that my PhD is in learning technologies. So talk about a moment. You know, I have a lot of friends and colleagues who have wanted to run remote learning experiments for many years. And now all of a sudden, these experiments that we thought about running for such a long time, we have no choice. We are running them because we have to. And I have a theory that many of these, we're doing them because we have to. And when we're able to get back together in person, we're gonna do that. We're gonna be very anxious to get back together in person. But I think about 30% of these experiments are gonna be successful. And they are going to integrate when the world opens up again and we can get back together again. I think some of those things that are working are going to survive. And that's going to be part of the evolution of higher education, is the things that we have learned that are in fact possible. Now, let me share one of those with you. Dr. Mehta mentioned that I met her as part of a program where her organization was being incubated. This was at the American Center in New Delhi. And this part of a program called Nexus, the Nexus Startup Hub. And I've taught in that program in 9 different cohorts. I taught in that program just recently, about a month ago. I did all of my teaching from the same place that I am at right now, from my desk, from my office in Texas. About 1.5 years ago, I was having a visa problem. We were afraid that I would not be able to come And both myself and Eric Aguilé, who runs this program, neither of us liked the idea that I would do it remotely. This time we embraced it because we did not have a choice. And for 5 days in a row, for about 5 hours each, I sat right here and I taught that program. And I think we were very surprised. We really didn't lose very much. We had each person in the session in person. I was able to interact with them. I was able to do pre-meetings with them. And I was able to share our content about evidence-based entrepreneurship with them, do mentorship, do follow-up, all of that from right where I'm at. Now, another program that I ran recently, I ran it virtually because I did not have a choice. It's called SA SMART. SA stands for San Antonio. It is a program for local middle and high school students, grades 7 to 12, a research and pitch deck competition around the challenges of our city, helping students engage with the challenges of our city. We had a final competition where we had 10 teams deliver a 7-minute pitch and do a 5-minute Q&A with a blue ribbon panel. We were able to pull that off. We missed being in person together. We missed that final awards ceremony where we could really celebrate with the students, but we did all of that online. We had the mayor of San Antonio with us. He gave comments. We were able to do an awards ceremony, and we pulled all of these things off. And so I think we have learned that many of the things that we do, we have lost some things, but we have gained the ability to do these kinds of events very quickly. I was able to deliver my Nexus content without spending roughly 32 hours on an airplane. And in doing that, I was able to do some things that would not have been possible otherwise. My final comment relates to certainty. My organization, San Antonio Museum of Science and Technology, we had about 2 or 3 weeks where we could not decide what to do. When we finally decided to embrace online, because things are going to change constantly over the next months, it really made our lives much easier and much more certain. And we have delivered programs to over 2,000 students now online. So I think adopting that in the moment is a wise move. So Dr. Mehta, again, thank you. And I look forward to adding additional comments in response to my colleagues.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Yes, Semi, we can move to next panelist.
Yes. So I would now invite Professor Sidney Freeman Jr. He's an associate professor of adult organizational learning and leadership at the University of Idaho. He's a former National Holmes Scholar and has earned professional certificates in the area of faculty development, online instruction, executive management, and organizational leadership. His research investigates the future of minority-serving institutions, the faculty career cycle, and higher education as a field of study. Dr. Freeman has published numerous journal articles and book chapters. His very recent publication is on managing stress in a time of increased pressure, perspectives from university presidents. With this, I invite Dr. Freeman to make his opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mehta, and thank you to all who have been a part of inviting me and to my colleagues on the panel. So as we discuss the shifting paradigm of the effect of COVID-19 on the world, I would like to focus my remarks on the ways in which Black Americans have a unique and dangerous struggle as they fight dual pandemics, the first being COVID-19 and the other being anti-Blackness. Similar to the Dalit people in India, Blacks are generally treated as the lowest ethnic and racial group in the United States. We rank among the most negatively impacted in every major social determinant of health and wealth. According to the United States Center of Disease Control, that includes discrimination in healthcare, housing, education, criminal justice, and finance. This has left Black people more susceptible to disease. For instance, many Black people, because of discrimination in access to education and jobs, are left to work in what our nation calls essential worker positions, meaning that they must go to work even if their lives are put at risk. Positions such as cashier at a local grocery store, hospital custodians, serving as persons who clean health facilities that are taking care of the most at-risk COVID-19 patients. Given their lack of access to transportation, they are often forced to take crowded public transportation vehicles such as buses and trains, where it is nearly impossible to implement proper social distancing. However, parallel to that, Black people do not receive equal protection under the law from police and other forms of law enforcement. Blacks are more likely targeted for minor traffic infractions, arrested or detained under suspicion of a crime without proof, and killed by police without proper cause. So we are often fearful of those who may be paid to serve and protect us. There are places in the United States that allow Black people the option not to wear a mask because of racial profiling and the fear that other races will assume that the Black person wearing a mask might be a criminal and not a person protecting themselves from COVID-19. Can you imagine that? It puts not only the health of that Black person at risk, but it puts other people at risk because they are not following health guidelines. So as you can see, Black people are experiencing two pandemics, racism and COVID-19. This has severely impacted the mental health of the African-American population. Historically, Black people did not seek counseling, as it was generally viewed with suspicion. However, Blacks are not only seeking mental health services, they are seeking the mental health services and counseling from specifically Black psychologists. In a recent study by Dr. Tommy Curry and colleagues, it is found that Blacks that are in middle and upper classes of our society experience increased levels of anxiety, depression, and mental health concerns due to isolation and racism. All these things impact Black students, faculty, and staff in higher education. They are not isolated from these issues. Black higher education faculty and staff are often overqualified for their positions, but underpaid in comparison with their counterparts. Black students who attend white schools are often exploited in the form of athletics. Athletics in the areas of American football and basketball are multi-billion-dollar business, where these athletes don't receive payment outside of paying for their studies, room, and board. Many athletes are being asked to play even with the risk of contracting COVID-19. Other Black students don't feel safe at white colleges and universities, as they are more likely to be harassed by police on campus, experience racial bias from their classmates in the form of racist slurs. Black faculty are also at risk, as they are a large proportion of non-tenured faculty, making them easier to fire and replace. They are often not promoted in these institutions, and are often serving in essential worker positions such as custodians and food preparers. As other Blacks in society, they are the most vulnerable, yet the most considered the essential workers of our society. I look forward to discussing the way forward later in this discussion. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Freeman, for your comments. I would like to invite Professor Pankaj Mittal now. Professor Mittal is the Secretary General of the Association of Indian Universities. Prior to joining AIU, she has served in the higher education sector, especially the university education, for over 3 decades at the University Grants Commission of India, She holds a PhD in agricultural statistics from Indian Agricultural Research Institute, New Delhi. Professor Mittal has a wide-ranging experience in higher education in policy planning and management of higher education. She was the first regular Vice Chancellor of Bhagat Phool Singh Mahila Vishwavidyalaya, Kanpur, the first rural women university in North India in the year 2008. With an honorary start, developing a tiny Gurukul into an institution of repute, she introduced a series of innovative practices and reforms in the only rural, residential, multi-faculty women's state university of the country that imparts education to over 7,000 girls from the kindergarten level to the PhD level in a holistic manner. Professor Mittal is also a recipient of the prestigious Fulbright Nehru Scholarship Grant for Educational Administrators and President of India Award in 2017 for digital initiatives in higher education, amongst others. She has served as a member of high-powered committees and professional bodies and has published several articles, reports on issues relating to higher education and women empowerment in national and international journals. Thank you very much, ma'am, for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Simi, for a very, very generous introduction. And thanks to Dr. Arjun for inviting me on this forum and giving me an opportunity to listen to everybody. Am I audible or should I use my earphones? Is it okay?
No, this is fine, ma'am.
Okay. So I have been asked to speak on internationalization of higher education. And I must say that today is a very, very important day because after, say, 5 years, the National Policy on Education has come out today. So I must say that IMPRI should have done this program earlier. Maybe we could have got it earlier. We have been waiting for a very, very long time to get the National Policy on Higher Education. And if you have seen the salient features of the new policy, internationalization, on which I am supposed to speak today, I have been given the topic of internationalization of higher education. That has a very, very prominent place in the National Policy on Higher Education, which has been sort of approved by the cabinet today. Now I think it will go to the parliament. So when we talk of internationalization of higher education, and if we talk of Indian perspective, most of you would be knowing that right now, in terms of international students, we do not have many. Like every year, about 7.5 lakh students go to foreign countries from India to study abroad, but the numbers which come to India is around 47,000 only. So that is something which worries us. So although internationalization does not comprise only of international students, but still that is a major component of internationalization. So we are having a lot of discussion on how to improve the internationalization in Indian higher education institutions and how to attract foreign students to India. Now, some of the issues which have been widely debated again and again are, one is the issue of infrastructure. We do not have very good infrastructure in every university. Some universities do have, but some universities have poor infrastructure, especially the hostel facility and the infrastructure which is required by the foreign students, it is not there. Then there is a issue of international curriculum. Our curriculum is mostly suited for our countries, but if we want to have international students, we should be having an international curriculum that internationally it should be viable. So that is another issue. But I think the most important issue, which as an AIU, if some of you don't know, AIU is a 95-year-old body, and right now it is having a membership of around 810. So by that count, it is the oldest and the largest association of the world of the universities. And we are engaged in academics, research, youth affairs, sports, and equivalence of foreign degrees with the Indian degrees. So equivalence of foreign degrees with the Indian degrees is another pain which happens and which is also not promoting internationalization. But before that, I would like to come to preparedness of our universities for internationalization. Now, in our country, very few universities, maybe I can count them on fingers, 15, 20 universities only. They are good in internationalization and they do have foreign students. But most of them, in spite of wanting to do internationalization, they don't know how to go about it. And many of them don't even have an international office in the university. So I feel the first step should be that we should, and we have taken a lead in this, AIU has taken a lead in this, that we should form an Indian network of international educators. Right now, there is no network of international educators. An Indian network of international educators, a parallel organization of, say, NAFSA, is required, because whosoever is doing good work in internationalization, they can guide remaining universities. And if the remaining universities also establish international offices and then do internationalization based on the best practices adopted by various other universities, I think it can promote internationalization in a big way. So we have just started the work. We have got the concept paper approved, and we'll be working on it, that how to make a network of international educators in India. That will have a membership from the universities, from the individuals, from the students, from the directors of international education. So this type of membership will be there in that particular network. Now, when this COVID struck India and the whole world, most of the people felt that internationalization will have a sort of a, it will go down. Means it will not be, it will be detrimental to, COVID will be detrimental to internationalization. But my take on this will be, especially for countries like India, which are diverse and not very rich, this can be an opportunity also. Because right now you see, you have two professors sitting here, international professors sitting here in this particular webinar. So any university, if they want to have a lecture from an international professor, if they want to engage with international faculty, if they want to have joint projects with international, say, students or faculty, it is very easy online, and it is cost effective, it is time effective, it is resource effective. So COVID can be taken up as an opportunity also to promote internationalization, because now you are able to talk to people, because so far in India, online was not very, very common. We used to feel a bit apprehensive in approaching people for online lectures or online classes or online learning. But now with the COVID, online has been taken up as a very, very welcome thing. And most of our teachers who were earlier camera shy, now they are ready to teach online, they are ready to embrace the technology. So with that, we can also promote internationalization in a cost-effective manner. Like there was a scheme called GYAN, Global Initiative for Academic Network, in which MHRD used to give a lot of money, means full traveling expenses and honorarium for international professors to visit Indian universities for 1 week or 2 weeks to teach, say, 1 credit course in an Indian university and to collaborate with teachers and the students. But then slowly, there was a limitation, because the travel cost was too much and the honorarium was too much for the foreign scholars. But with this COVID, now we can have a new avatar, new form of that GYAN scheme, in which the teaching can be done online. So more and more international professors can be involved under the GYAN scheme, rather we can call it GYAN online. So in that GYAN online scheme, we can have more and more international professors, more and more interaction at a minimal cost. So in my take would be that the internationalization would get a boost because of COVID. It will not be sort of detrimental to internationalization. And many foreign universities right now, when they are moving to online mode, many of our students who have taken admission in these international universities, they are either withdrawing the admissions or they are postponing the admissions, that okay, we'll join next year, because they want to experience the country. So those students are also with us who want to study in our own universities, just because the COVID is not allowing them to travel. So that will also help us in having good students in India itself. So I will end my talk with this, that let us take it as an opportunity for internationalization rather than taking it as a booming of internationalization. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Mittal, for highlighting very pertinent points. Also, this point of camera shy is, I think, very important. Our faculties and also students are very camera shy, and this pandemic will change. And then we wish you all the best for GYAN Online. And you already have approved the concept note of the network of international educators and other things. Very, very innovative initiative. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Simi, we can go to next panelist. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So now I invite Dr. Abdulla Rasheed Ahmed. Dr. Ahmed is the Honorable Minister of State for Education in the Republic of Maldives. He is a distinguished educationist and has over 3 decades of experience in the field of education. He is currently the head of National Institute of Education in Maldives. He was awarded the Best Principal in Maldives in 2010, and he was also the Global Goodwill Ambassador of International Education Advisory Council. Dr. Ahmed holds a PhD in instructional education and has a master's degree in educational leadership from Nottingham University, United Kingdom. I invite Dr. Ahmed to make his opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Simi and distinguished panelists. Good morning and very good evening to you all. It is a great pleasure and honor to be with these experts, educational experts. Within my discussion, I'll show you 3 slides presentation and continue my session with these points. As the topic goes, evolving paradigm of higher education amidst the pandemic, I just want to highlight the background of the pandemic situation. According to the International Association of Universities survey report, on 1st April, schools and higher education were closed, and about 185 countries affected on this, and students numbers 1.54 billion students were affected due to the pandemic. 80% of the respondents who participated in this survey believe that there is an impact and will have impact on the enrollment of the universities and students learning. However, 30% of respondents believe that pandemic has a new opportunity. Previous speakers also have highlighted the importance of this point. Although this is a difficult situation, unfortunate situation, this situation creates new opportunities for higher education around the world. And online, it is through online and distance learning. 2/3 of the classroom teaching have been replaced by online and distance learning due to this pandemic. However, due to this online and distance learning, there are challenges. These challenges comes in terms of technical infrastructure and competencies and pedagogies. As we all know, university lecturers are prepared to teach in physical classrooms. Normally, it is not the kind of pedagogy that lecturers are prepared online learning. So this creates some challenge for providing distance and online learning. At the same time, the forced move to distance learning creates opportunity to propose more flexible learning possibilities to provide education to anybody, anywhere, at any time. So these are the advantages. If we look at the advantage side of the pandemic, we can see advantage. Stephen Covey once said that successful people, they feed the opportunities and they starve the problem. Therefore, if we look at the opportunity side of the pandemic, we can see a lot of opportunities for higher education as well. In my last slide, UNESCO framework on continuing higher education, they have some principles. Out of that, I'm going to highlight 3 principles. One is ensuring the right to higher education for all, and second one is leave no student behind. So these things easily can be done through online and distance learning, because access can be given without borders. At the same time, according to UNESCO, it is too early to estimate future profile of higher education. But this is a time and this is an opportunity to rethink about the higher education and also extend to possible redesign on teaching and learning. I think as we now should rethink about and redesign of higher education, we have to think about incorporating 21st century skills in higher education and giving more importance on human capital and social capital in higher education. Higher education should not be only seen aiming to provide just certificates, but more emphasis should be given preparing them practical life and also for the future. In future, they will be in the job. Maybe the job is not yet created and the kind of technology they will be using is not yet invented. Therefore, creativity, critical thinking, problem solving, communication, collaboration, these things should be given more importance. I think then higher education will be much more successful. With this comment, I conclude my time. Thank you, Dr. Simi and the panelists.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your presentation. I now invite Professor Soumen Chattopadhyay. Professor Soumen is a professor of economics of education and education policy at the Zakir Hussain Center for Educational Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. His research area includes financing of higher education, education governance, and macroeconomic aspects of the Black economy. And he has written extensively on these areas and has several book chapters and research articles of national and international repute to his credit. We are thankful, sir, for you've been able to join us. Over to you.
So I must begin by thanking Arjun for giving me the opportunity to be here today, and I must greet all the panelists and those who are present here today. Given the time allotted to me, I am supposed to be focusing on financing of higher education as the future is unfolding before us. Now, higher education institutions, the universities, have been undergoing transformation for ages. And in fact, it's the second longest surviving institutions after the church. The question is whether the pandemic, now that we are faced with, is going to accelerate the changes that we have been witnessing for the years. The first thing is that because of the pandemic, the budgetary allocation for higher education is going to suffer a disproportionate cut. It has been happening. I mean, in real terms and per capita terms, the budget for higher education world over, in the developed countries, in India, in Latin America, in Africa, the budget for higher education has suffered a decline over the years. But because of the pandemic, the economic package and the budget allocation will be now shifting more towards the health sector. There will be a further cut in the higher education budget. This is what I like to speculate. The second, we have to understand how the funding of higher education is going to evolve. And in order to understand that, we need to understand how the market is going to shape up. See, if I focus on teaching only, the online teaching is now being promoted by the government, and now the government will be pushing online teaching more because of the pandemic. Now, what happens? The service, the physical presence of the teachers in the classroom, the offline teaching in the classroom, will undergo a transformation. It will be virtually now a service to a product. Why? Because our lectures can be recorded, digitized, and it becomes a product. It can be downloaded by the students. It can be watched by the students at any point of time from anywhere in the world. So the time and the space, the two major dimensions of service cease to matter. It becomes not only national, it becomes a globally available, right? And the third dimension is all about the quality. Now, when the service becomes a product because of online teaching, because of this banking on internet to telecast our lecture and all, it has got very significant implication for the two sides of the market. What happens in the market? Now the students, their discretion to choose courses now would transcend the national boundaries. It's like the choice-based credit system we have had in India. It is going to promote that choice-based credit system. That means the students can now select courses across the university, and at the global level, if the credit becomes transferable. And on the other side, what is happening to the education provider is very interesting. Education provider will find offering of online courses rather lucrative because it is claimed that the cost of education goes down with the online teaching because of the low marginal cost and a gradual decline in the average cost of teaching. But it need not be the case. If some universities are willing to offer very good quality education, the cost need not fall. Now, you see what is happening now. The universities are hierarchically arranged in terms of the quality. And one reason behind this is the quality of the students and the teachers are not reproducible, are not replicable, because human capital embodied in the teachers and students cannot be reproduced. Now, what happens with online teaching? They become reproducible because the online lectures are now can be made available through their website or through some other platform. Now, there is a possibility the entire higher education system will get segregated into the best of the universities and the mediocre universities. And it's going to be highly competitive. It will be increasingly become difficult for the mediocre universities to sustain. Because of online teaching, the number of students who can be given admission by the best of the universities would witness a dramatic rise. So it is being speculated the higher education system is going to be highly segregated and the mediocre institutions will find it increasingly difficult to compete in such market. Now, the public and the private may collaborate. There's something called online project program managers for profit. So some universities would enter into a partnership with some of the private firms specialized in internet technologies, IT technologies, and they are called edtech companies, and offer the courses. So one way of looking at it would be, one extreme is the online university, a university completely online. That means it can provide teaching anytime, anywhere to anybody in the world. So that is an extreme case. The other case would be we are going to evolve towards a hybrid model. Now, in this kind of system, there are very serious implications for the public-private divide. What would be the role of the public sector? As I've already explained, that possibly the budget for the higher education by the government would suffer a decline. Private sector will now collaborate with the public and enter into different forms of PPP, public-private partnership, depending on the technology of offering such teaching online. So the system has to be understood, therefore, what would be the implication for access, what would be the implication for the quality, what would be the implication for the expansion of the system as a whole. Now, given the digital divide, it is being argued that not all the students are equally placed in our country, I'm talking about, to attend the classes, to access the online teaching that you're offering. Now, this is this is a daunting challenge for the country, how to ensure that the students differently located in different regions, differently placed socio-economically in terms of the region also, are not being able to access the online teaching which are being offered by the universities. So the ideal system would be not to abandon the traditional mode of university, that is the public funding traditional mode of university. There are some advantages of digitization of this teaching, so we should accept that. At the same time, we should also safeguard how to make this higher education system accessible and the quality of education can be offered. One problem with this kind of over-dependence on the online teaching, I'm taking it to an extreme situation. Over-dependence on online teaching means the campus ceases to matter and the teaching gets confined within the classroom. It doesn't happen. The teaching goes beyond the classroom. Teaching goes beyond after dinner in a university like ours, JNU. So the socialization, the faculty-student interaction, student-student interaction, it takes place throughout the day in the library, in the canteen, outside the classroom. So that is why even if the online teaching possibly can be cost-effective, can reach the students in the remotest part of the country, students can transcend the national boundary and it can become global, but one has to be extremely careful that this space, the university space, is very, very important for the student to have the unique experience, the lifetime experience when they pursue their higher education. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Chattopadhyay, for highlighting this very pertinent point that after this pandemic, when we are going into this digital space, the cost of teaching is not going to decline. Rather, I would say that the cost of adopting to this digital technologies will also incur some cost. And thank you, and also for highlighting that due to this pandemic, there can also be top-heavy structure within the elite and mediocre higher education institution, and there are chances also of oligopoly or things like that. Thank you so much for coming and sharing these thoughts. Simi, we can go to the next panelist.
Yes. Thank you, sir. So now we invite Professor Sachidanand Sinha. Professor Sinha is a professor at the Center for the Study of Regional Development at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He works in the areas of access to social amenities, particularly education, healthcare, housing, social geography, and related development issues among the socially deprived sections of population in India. He was a member of the working group of the 11th Plan of University Grants Commission, Working Group for Development of Model Colleges in Educationally Backward Districts of India, Ministry of Minority Affairs, and Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. During 2010 and 11, he served as a consultant to the Punjab Governance Reforms Commission, and later in 2012-13, he was the chief advisor to the core group of the development of school textbooks in social sciences for the government of Rajasthan. Professor Sinha has been a guardian and guide to us, especially to Dr. Arjun Kumar, and we are thankful you could join us this evening, sir. Over to you. Sir, you are on mute.
Yeah, I have unmuted myself. Thank you for this very elaborate introduction, which I really, again, I don't deserve that. My concern is very well presented in what I've been doing. Basically, my concern is towards the safeguarding the interests of the marginalized in such a huge country like India. When we talk of higher education and we talk of the current pandemic, it seems that, we have lost so much of whatever aspirational changes that were happening in the marginalized parts of the country, and there has been a sudden stop to this whole process. I really do not, and I can't speculate the kind of changes which are likely to happen. But following from what Manisha and what Shaumin said and others, I fully agree that we have to really look at the challenge, this challenge in a very, very different way, with a fresh consideration of all issues that are there at hand. Let me just flag 2 or 3 important points, which I think will matter in years to come, whether we have the pandemic or we have online education or whatever be the nature of higher education that might take place. But these concerns would remain valid. Number 1 is that, ever since neoliberal reforms have taken place in this country, as well as everywhere in the global South, what has been happening? I mean, this is not to contest what Mittal ji was saying. Professor Mittal was saying that we should not be looking outwards, internationalize our educational system. But what has really been happening in India particularly is that, every single university, due to the kinds of the challenges of the reforms and the kind of guidelines which are being posited by the ministries of the state or whatever, and the kind of changes which have occurred in the nature of governance, also because, they got to compete for ranking, we are increasingly becoming global in our orientation rather than local. Now what I really mean by this? What I really mean by this is that, if we were to perhaps take care of the Indian higher educational scenario, then, we have all kinds of universities. We have universities which have very regional kind of architecture. There are universities which have a national kind of an architecture. And both these institutions are of great importance. Now, the point that, I'm really trying to say is, and that's the topic which was given to me, that is human development and higher education, then I really see that, one of the most important challenges, especially at the local level, at the regional level, has been to really work systematically towards helping the local communities. I mean, that is where, whatever be your product, the product that the education brings in is to alleviate the conditions of people wherever they are. And that perhaps has shrunk over the years, especially after the neoliberal architecture, which has really been towards more global orientation and so on and so forth. We've got to really bring that back. We've got to really bring that back. We've got to really situate the institutions living in, located in some of the interior parts, strengthen them, not to reject them that, okay, they really do not have the resources. We've got to really put more resources there. And therefore, following this pandemic, the role of these institutions which some of us were saying mediocre, some of the institutions are elitist or whatever, that really has to gain significance. Not therefore to be seen as catering to a class of people who perhaps would eventually, alternatively, in a situation where we want to really cut down the cost, which of course Raman has very rightly pointed out, it may not invariably lead to cutting down the cost, but it would become eventually a cost-effective kind of a scenario. And in a situation like this, there is a danger of segmentation. It's not only a market segmentation. This segmentation is going to happen in a country where already there are segmented natures of hierarchies which are structurally determined and which have ceased to which has not allowed us to really allow the kind of mobility that one looked at when we talked about higher education. So therefore, the danger of segmentation is something which is going to loom large. I mean, and that is going to really harm the segment which in fact is yet to be moving into higher education, or perhaps it's just a very small proportion of them have moved into higher education, because the role of higher education in really providing mobility, socio and economic mobility, is certainly indisputable. Now, having said this, I would like that, given the situation of the pandemic, these universities, or most of our universities, should be perhaps given a kind of a decentralized kind of a structure to develop curriculum, which is not identical to one another. Sometimes, we are told that perhaps, a national curriculum policy or a national curriculum agreement perhaps would help everybody, because it will be a kind of a seamless kind of a transfer from one university to another. Now, all these things are not valid precisely because, different universities are situated in different environmental and social contexts. A university in the tribal area perhaps would like to develop courses on forestry, on the livelihood of people, not necessarily, to in fact bring them into a kind of a global a chain of product supplies and so on and so forth. If they are happy there and their experiences need to be understood, I think such things will have to be given scope in the curriculum. So this perhaps, is a major point which I would like to say, where the higher education will have to address the immediate needs of the people, particularly in their areas of livelihood. Second important point which I would like to share, and I will stop there, is the point, I haven't really seen the latest declaration, which in fact took place today on the educational policy, but having read the draft, what I really see is that there is already a lot of concern which has been put together, and I can read between the lines that, we are really thinking of a kind of situation where, the social mobility, whichever or whatever kind of social mobility or economic mobility that has been possible with the help of reservation, with the help of whatever affirmative action that we have provided, has certainly altered the power equation both in the countryside as well as at the national level. Now, this power equation, which in fact is being seen with a certain kind of a suspicion, because those who are the elite classes, they would certainly, they're not very happy about it. And that is why what you can see is that there have been cuts on financing, there have been cuts on scholarships, there have been cuts on the regional colleges, people are retiring, and therefore, you know, the posts are being left vacant. Even in Delhi University, 4,000 plus positions are yet to be filled and so forth. I mean, so looking at this continuity of instances, which is not exactly related to pandemic, which is not related to pandemic, what I really see is that, you know, this will or could be taken as a kind of an opportunity, you know, to in fact effectively introduce two layers of education. One, of course, would be the kind of an education which will be afforded by people, which will be cost, for which people can pay, for those who afford. And you can look at the university architecture. Earlier, the University Grants Commission used to fund universities and colleges, of course, not beyond 36% or 40%. State governments used to. Now they are being asked to take loans. Now, if you are taking a loan, the loan will have to be paid back, and therefore it will certainly exclude a class of people who in fact are aspiring to become socially mobile. So in a country like India, which is fraught with different kinds of inequalities, I think higher education is the only way out. And therefore, we need to be really putting in much greater emphasis. One can say our policies are inclusive, but on the ground, how we dispense with the policy is really the matter. And that perhaps is going to be of a very, very different nature, precisely because of the fact that the power equations are undergoing a change. All forms of affirmative actions will take a back seat, has already begun taking a back seat, and I don't think there's going to be a fundamental change in coming years, irrespective of the fact that our constitutional provisions really protect that. And we can see as to how things are being taken up, even in the court of law. I mean, I would not like to mention any particular case. So therefore, the social processes of deprivation and marginalization, which in fact could have been addressed very effectively and by higher education. Of course, higher education has a role. It's not the entire domain of higher education to address all forms of inequalities, but nevertheless, you know, it is likely that in this given situation of the COVID, because, you know, this is what I have experienced, you know, I have not been in a position to meet my students for 4 months, and I have not been in a position to even hold classes online, because, you know, there is a great, what you call is a digital divide. You know, on top of that, you have floods in Assam and Bihar, and there is no electricity. So you can have all these challenges, which of course gradually would see a much greater amount of input of the IR information technology. The information technology will certainly be in a position to sell their products much more effectively. There'll be a better market for them, but I can tell you, it is going to be at the cost of the deprived segments. Of course, there are opportunities. We are prepared to learn from it. We are no more camera shy, but, you know, we know that the classroom situation, which in fact is so very important to effectively carry out learning process, the learning cannot, which Shraman also mentioned, is not an isolated kind of an exercise between the teacher and the taught. You know, it's a social process, and that social process is not always defined. That social process is beyond the ambit of whatever is the radar of higher education pedagogical design, and therefore it remains much beyond that. And therefore, the moment, you know, we have greater dependence on online and information technology, I think it's going to ruin the very future of higher education in this country. It can only be supplementing, not taking the major, the driving seat, you know. So I'm certainly not for, I mean, I would take a very categorical political position. Whatever be the opportunity, I am not for online. I am for interaction in the classroom. I am for interaction between people and the teacher in their own local setting. And I would like greater funding, which we in India have not been putting in. There's a lot of opportunity for us to spend money because after all, people matters. You know, it's not the market that matters. It is ultimately the people who matter. And thank you very much. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Professor Sinha. I remember our two hours lecture, 1.5 2 hours lecture going to 3 hours, and such a wonderful interaction there in your class in JNU and also within in Dhaba and everywhere in JNU. Thank you so much for highlighting two very pertinent points. One is of special justice. We all know that whatever, you know, the gross enrollment ratio in Delhi, it is, let us say, 45-50%. In small towns, it is as low as in rural areas, backward districts, it is as low as 5%. So that's a big divide. And also about the social mobilities and other very pertinent point you raised. We'll come back again to this very important issues you raised. Now I would, we'll go to the second round and take a cue from other panelists. If we have any comments, then we can reflect upon that, or any theme we can also pick and reflect on that, and also focus on the way forward, that what can be the way forward in higher education, especially pertaining to this current pandemic, as many of the newspapers are also now acknowledging that there is no second wave. In fact, it is a big wave, and the first wave is not over, because there is no first, second, or third wave. It is a big wave in which we are in. So looking into these aspects also, and also on the current contemporary situation, Professor Mittal has to go, so I would request her to reflect upon these issues. Simi, if you can have some selected question to Professor Mittal.
Yes. So thank you, Dr. Kumar, and thank you, Professor Sinha, for your intriguing lecture. So I would now invite Professor Mittal for the second round. I know you have to leave, so there's a question that has also been posed to you, and it says that, is it important to internationalize by means of increasing inflow of foreign students, or to internationalize in the sense of outflow of our knowledge among the students of entire globe? So what is your take on this, and what do you see as a way forward for the universities, especially when we are moving towards a self-reliant or an Atmanirbhar Bharat, and when the call is for being vocal for local? Ma'am, your opinion and your remarks.
Thank you, Simi. With regard to the first question, I have already answered in the blog itself, that question answer panel itself, that both are important. We should be having international students in India, and we are doing that Study in India program and Stay in India program for international students. That is a specially launched scheme of MHRD. Similarly, we need to have our universities to establish campuses in foreign universities. So if our universities have campuses on a foreign land, then also we can promote Indian higher education abroad. So we had a scheme called PIHEAD, promoting Indian higher education abroad. So both are equally important. We should be doing both if we want to promote internationalization. Regarding the way forward, now the way forward, because the new education policy has been approved today by the cabinet, so that will show the way forward in a big way. And it is a very, very forward-looking policy. We are thinking of having many, many reforms. Some of the major reforms is, like, one is National Credit Bank. So if some of you who do not know what is National Credit Bank, it is like in a bank we deposit money, in the National Credit Bank we deposit credits. So that means in the universities we will be able to take admission not only in the programs, full-fledged like BA, BSc, BCom, like these programs, but also in the courses within the program. Courses means, in Indian parlance, we say paper. For say BA, we have 16 papers, means 16 courses. So now admission will be possible in different courses also, and the students can be earning credits by doing different courses from different universities. And after accumulating a certain set of credits in a particular area, they can go to a university and demand a degree. So that type of a concept is coming up in the National Credit Bank, which is also indicated in the national policy. Internationalization, of course, they are saying that it will be promoted. One more important thing which we all are sort of finding a problem with a lot of baggage also is the affiliation system. That we have an affiliation system which is not found in most of the countries, that our colleges are affiliated to the universities and the universities are conducting the examinations for those colleges. So national policy is calling for abolition of affiliation system, and what they are feeling is that in times to come, maybe in 10-15 years, all the colleges will either become a university, or if they are not good enough, they will close down, or a group of colleges will become a university and they will get a degree awarding power. So that is something very, very forward looking. And then one more thing, they are against single faculty university. They are saying that we should be having multi-faculty universities. So all the universities, we have many single faculty universities right now in our country. For example, law universities are there, then there are medical universities, engineering universities. So they feel that every student should be having a holistic education of all the disciplines, and interdisciplinary education should be promoted. Therefore, instead of single faculty universities, we should be having multi-faculty universities, and universities can also be divided into three parts. One is only research-oriented universities or teaching universities, or the ones which are having emphasis on both. But research is given a lot of emphasis, and something called National Research Foundation is on the anvil. And National Research Foundation, initially it was said that 20,000 crores will be given to National Research Foundation, so that will have a lot of impetus, will be given to the research in higher education. So let us see how, I mean, proof of the pudding lies in eating it. So we just have to see how we are going to implement it, because implementation is a very big issue. Right now, it looks like a fairy tale. It looks like, okay, it is very good if it happens. This, I mean, something new or big is going to happen. This is what we all feel. But implementation has to be done very, very properly. And for implementation, it is the universities, the faculty, the colleges, the students who have to be passionate about it. Any policy can be implemented only if there is a passion amongst the students. Like, I remember when Dr. Zakir Hussain, he was laying the foundation stone of Jamia Millia Islamia. He said two lines in Hindi. He says, किसी भी संस्था को बनाने के लिए सामान से ज़्यादा अरमान की ज़रूरत होती है.
Oh, क्या बात है, क्या बात है. Pankaj ji, I'd like to stop you here and say that this is what we were missing in our webinars. Thank you for bringing it alive. Thank you. 3 cheers.
So it says किसी भी संस्था को बनाने के लिए सामान से ज़्यादा अरमान की ज़रूरत होती है. सामान means like library, books, buildings, labs. All this is required, and arman is the passion. Passion of the teachers, passion of the faculty, passion of the staff who are in the university. So more than the saman means the physical things, you need the passion. और उसकी अगली लाइन भी है, इससे किसी भी संस्था को बनाने के लिए सामान से ज्यादा अरमान की जरूरत है, और जिस संस्था में अरमान खत्म हो जाए, उस संस्था की इमारतें खंडरों में तब्दील हो जाती हैं. And that is very fact that we should be having a passion to do something. Unless we have the passion, these policies will come and go. No policy can be implemented without the passion of the students as well as the faculty. So we should display the passion to ensure that the policy is implemented in its letter and spirit. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Pankaj Mittal, and have a nice evening. Thank you for joining. And yes, and Simin next.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So now I would invite Professor Manisha Priyam for her brief remarks. We'll not take it long, around 2 to 3 minutes each, so that we move on to the question and answers.
Okay, so I have just very small 2 comments to make. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Very small 2 comments to make. See, we understand that today the web or the Zoom has become our compulsion. Some of these practices will stay, but let me tell you, there's a lot of variation. While I was speaking to you, I was reading a World Bank blog on district level variation in violence on women, and once again they're saying, so there's a lot of variation. While I would like to agree with Professor Krista when he was saying that he's able to do it from the US and it's very effective, when both sides are equally competent, there can be a jetty that can deck in, right? But when you are dealing with a massification in Indian higher education, where high levels of massification is not a number, Professor Cliff, it's about very deep entrenched social inequalities. And social inequalities are not just that my father was, you know, a man of color or of caste, or my, you know, varying levels of, you know, socioeconomic inequality. I think the single most challenge in India is, perhaps in higher education, the issue of language. When I talk to you about a university in Pune, for example, our largest land grant university, their best, finest faculties, they have 5 foreign language courses on campus, but each and every student learns the best in the world in Marathi. Now I go and address them. The best in social sciences and methods happens in some other language. That's one. And I have lived, now I have spent 30 years of my career in higher education in India, but going to the campus and look, higher education educators learn, we co-create language, we co-create knowledge. We are in the Humboldtian mold, a teaching and research university. The learnings that I've had from the Kolhapur University students is far different from what I get from Delhi University. And it wouldn't have happened unless I had traveled to that university. So there is a geographically embedded notion of higher education. We can try and say the world is flat, but if within India and within the 2 most advanced states within India, Delhi and Maharashtra with the highest density of higher education, my learning has happened at age 30 in my professional career, then I think social inequality gives the strongest lessons to the higher education campus. It can be an idea of the university. It can be the soul of the university, but we cannot ignore that, number one. Number two, as far as technology is concerned, I don't think public university professionals are Luddites, especially the liberal arts people. We are not saying that it should not go online, but look at the fact that, you know, what's the difference between it being at the London School of Economics and being in Delhi? Technically nothing. But till the time that I was in Delhi, through the virtual gateway of the London School of Economics, the resources of the world were with me. In the same geography, when I'm now existing as a senior professional in the city, through the web archives of its premier, most important institution of the Ministry of Human Resource Development called the National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration, my poverty of knowledge is simply because of the inequality of the web resources. So I'm the only one going to the library, for example, and saying, oh, we need search terms which are Boolean algebra ridden. I keep saying you need to connect to the world libraries so we can talk about internationalization. We can say the world is flat. But first learn about what we are deprived of in terms of the knowledge world. While every crisis is an opportunity, remember, the university arose in certain crises. The 5th century idea of the university was battles between city-states. The most eminent descriptions in the philosophy of sciences have happened when there's a crisis. Now, as an academic, crisis is a normal. Whoever understood the world was moving in a linear scale were wrong. The university fellows were looking at uncertainty as the principle. So for us, this is not the new normal. For us, this is the normal. For us, the challenge is, how do I create a learning society given my inequalities? They are digital, they are those of vulnerability, they are those of race, they are those of class. Now, in the name of technology, I'm a little afraid that the agenda of the liberal public university is pushed out. We need the gizmo technocrats. Push out the liberal, push out the understanding, push out the counterfactual making powers of the university. The university has virtually no other role to play in eternal time. That role is that the power of the counterfactual. And I think let that power of the university remain. The crisis is something that the university is best equipped to deal with.
Thank you, ma'am. I invite Professor Cliff Zintgraff to make his comments.
Thank you, Dr. Mehta. And I want to highlight a couple of comments I heard from my colleagues. I believe it was Professor Sinha, pardon me if I got your name wrong, who said address the needs of the people and their livelihoods. And just a moment ago, the idea of passion in education elicited a reaction. And what I want to highlight for everyone is that the work that I have been doing recently and the idea that I'm promoting of STEM in the Technopolis, or STEM in the city, to think of it more simply, the idea of aligning the educational experiences with the needs of people, and especially local needs and local priorities, is a powerful approach. It is a powerful approach both from a philosophical standpoint and a policy standpoint, as you think about how to develop the things that are important to you, and from a practical standpoint as well. We need all of these students in, and by the way, I haven't even mentioned equity yet, but when you add equity on top of that and you think about the challenges we have in the world, finding ways to get your local supporters, government, industry, academia, nonprofits, all lined up moving toward that same mission and passionate about it and wanting to help you is really important. A couple of examples from my community. I mentioned one, the SA SMART program we run here. That's not higher ed, it's for grades 7 to 12. Our challenge this year for these students who did research and made a pitch deck was digital equity. We planned that before COVID, and they researched that, and we had people in the community emerge who wanted to help with that challenge. We had volunteers, mentors, funding. Another thing that we do in my community of San Antonio, we like to call ourselves Cyber City USA. Many of the experts in the United States in cybersecurity live in San Antonio, Texas, because of our military connections. We are aligning programs at the secondary level, at the college level, to cybersecurity. When we do that, industry shows up. They bring mentors, they bring volunteers, they bring funding to the table. And again, this is a very powerful approach for you all to use, and something that I think in a 2 or 3 minute time frame I can share and challenge you all to think about. What are the local challenges that you're dealing with, and how do you leverage that in order to build the programs that are of interest to you? I will close with 2 quick points. In the book that colleagues and I have edited, there is a chapter by Dr. Paul Resta called Digital Equity in the Technopolis. Dr. Resta leads a UNESCO jury on digital equity, and I would encourage you all to hit the internet and read the abstract to see if you find that of interest. I'll close with this thought. It's been said that when changing values meets economic necessity, that's when we can make change in the world. We have got to find a way to bring our neighbors along. I live in an area of San Antonio. I work in an area with 90% plus Hispanic or Latinx population. We have another area of our town, of our city, that is predominantly Black. We are working proactively to try to help those people in our community. It is a practical imperative for us. It is a moral imperative for us. It's a competitive issue for us to be able, for our city to be able to move forward in a way that we are competitive in the global marketplace. All of these things are meeting together. Dr. Mehta, thank you again for the chance to be here.
Thank you, Professor Cliff, for your remarks. I would like to invite Professor Sidney Freeman. Professor Freeman,
yes. Thank you so much again for this opportunity to share, and I appreciate all the panelists, their presentations, in particular with this whole notion of equity across the board is so important. And as I was thinking about ways forward, I thought about how we apply this to COVID and racism and how it plays out in the higher education context. And so just have 2 major points, and I have a few sub-points within those. And so I believe that we should treat racism in higher education the same way we have treated COVID across the world. And this doesn't come from me. This comes from a minister by the name of Carl Lentz in New York. He suggests that we should assume that everyone has it, meaning that everyone has some kind of bias. We should listen to the experts, those who have studied issues of race and racism and how it impacts vulnerable communities. We should alter our lives so that it does not continue to spread. So what are the ways in which we identify it, and which we put policies and practices in place to ensure that those negative practices do not negatively impact Black people. And then lastly, create policies again to ensure that it doesn't come back. So last month I wrote an article on 10 concrete policies that would show that Black lives matter. And so one of the things that I like to focus on is that we should focus and put our attention on the vulnerable community. And in this case, we're talking about Black populations on college and university campuses. We should shift our focus away from centering white people and their feelings. Instead of worrying about how they would react to it, the focus should be on ways in which we can empower those vulnerable communities on campus. Some examples of policies that would support that would be to support and promote Black faculty and staff on campus. Also, as I mentioned earlier in my initial presentation, provide more mental health professionals for students that are reconciling both issues of racism and class and COVID-19 issues that are impacting their families and themselves. And then lastly, provide more financial support for those students to ensure that they are able to stay in school. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Freeman. I would now invite Dr. Abdulla Rasheed Ahmed to make his points.
Hi, thank you. I think all the distinguished panelists have highlighted very important points regarding the higher education. Actually, in the Maldives, higher education sector is definitely small compared to other countries, even in India. We have 2 national universities and some private colleges. But during this pandemic, our colleges and universities, almost all the higher education institute, reach out students through online learning. But as I have highlighted, online learning has a challenge. The greatest challenge we have experienced is the speed of internet. That's the greatest challenge. And another major challenge is the kind of online learning pedagogy. Online learning pedagogy and assessment should be redesigned, and higher education lecturers and academic personnel should be specifically trained. But this pandemic really provide a great opportunity, flexibility, and an opportunity rethink. As I mentioned before, or if we take this as a great opportunity to redesign the higher education and make higher education more meaningful for the future, I believe that everybody who graduate from higher education institutions will be more prepared for the real life. In the teaching, we have to use more authentic and problem-based teaching learning approach. If we work in such a manner in the new paradigm, I believe that in future higher education brings more benefit to the society. Before concluding my remarks, generally we can see in higher education students are trying for the marks. I don't know in other countries, but in my experience, people believe education means producing the result. If anybody is getting distinction or higher distinction, we are very happy. But the question is values. Question is skills. In the real life, it's not the certificate which goes to the work, which interact with the people. It is the skill. It is the values. So when we rethink about higher education and when we redesign the higher education, I think it is very important to keep a balance. We don't need to give so much of importance on the content. In the 20th century, in 19th century, maybe content is important. It is not easily accessible. Now content is everywhere. Information is everywhere. So we have to produce critical thinkers and innovators, entrepreneurs, who is skillful and who is value driven. Then only higher education will bring peace to the world and innovation and creativity. Thank you so much, Dr. Simi and your colleagues for organizing this wonderful conference. And I'm really honored and privileged to be such a great team of experts. They are very experienced and I really enjoyed their experience and their thoughtful information. Once again, thanks so much. Thanks so much all the viewers and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I would now invite Professor Soumen Chattopadhyay to make his brief remarks.
I will take only 1 or 2 minutes to briefly mention. Thanks, Simi. Number one, any education reform which would entail a restructuring of the education system should ensure, and it is indisputable, that all are on the level playing field, the students and the education providers. Now, if the level playing field does not exist, the restructuring of the education system, I haven't had a look at the new education policy, would have devastating consequences. So what the government should do, number one, the students who are not in a position to access the online teaching which is being offered possibly in the next semester, the semester which has just begun, should be helped out, no way out. I mean, you know, either by giving them the extra money to buy the gadgets or to do whatever is needed, it should be done. Secondly, universities need money as well to spend on IT. If universities don't get adequate money, how do you expect them to provide the necessary facilities? And we, the teachers, have not been provided facilities. University needs additional help, financial support from the UGC. Number two, privatization in Indian higher education is going to rise. It has been rising, and the union minister has already announced while presenting the union budget, external commercial borrowing and FDI, and because of the technology now, the Indian market will be possibly inundated with the foreign participation in collaboration with the Indian system. And this private participation, some of them will be for profit, some of them will be not for profit. It will be having some consequences for the cost being borne by the students. Particularly, I'm concerned with the students who are coming from the underprivileged section of the society. Number three is the question of the implication for the job market. The increasing use of artificial intelligence, the tendency to automate, will have a very different kind of requirement for the skill that we at the universities are providing. Now, if we have a differentiation within the university system, which is getting accentuated, the job market would be treating the students similarly, the credibility of the degree and the skill that we impart. And I actually presume that the students from the remotest part of the country or those who did not get proper training for the online or from the socio-economic challenge section of the society will find it increasingly difficult to participate on equal terms in the job market. And the fourth comment is, if you allow the universities, if you are forcing the universities to compete globally, the challenge is how to negotiate with the local and the national. Because university society connect to address the local need, to address the national need is also very important, right? So the differentiation within the university system is inevitable, but how to balance the need for the local, national, and the global level is something that the government should be worried about, rather than forcing us to compete globally and then it's a survival of the fittest. that will be having devastating consequences for the kind of, given the socio-economic structure that is embedded. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Finally, I invite Professor Sachidanand Sinha to make his remarks. Professor Sinha, over to you.
Yeah, I have just a couple of remarks. I think, I've made my point clear earlier. Thank you, Cliff, and thank you, Sydney, for enlightening me as to how the technology that you have been using is also is doing something which perhaps brings the local concerns on the agenda. And my first point again would be that we should take this opportunity to in fact address and reorient our universities, which in fact in the sway of neoliberal ideology globally have been completely disconnected from its own population. So this is one thing, and that is what perhaps was seen, that you enter higher education, you become an elite class for all practical purposes, and you are no good for the local society. Now this perhaps has to change, and this is what has been pointed out very well through the failures that we can see perhaps, and perhaps that is what would help us connect again our universities wherever they are. And there cannot be good universities and bad universities. There can be universities where there is something which is happening, which in fact is helping people, is empowering people, and that's what really matters. So that's point number one. This whole business of competition globally and ranking nationally for a national status or a regional status or this status or that status, I think it's a function of statistics. What it really does, it really creates a kind of a differentiation, which in fact is not the real one. It is absolutely, I would say it's absolutely a fictitious kind of ranking, which I really do not agree with any one of these rankings. I would be happy with a university or a school which is working with the local society, bringing their knowledge onto the agenda of the curriculum, which perhaps would have greater consequences for their lives than perhaps talking about something which really happened a few thousand years, a few thousand miles away. The point that I would like to say is that, we got to be really creative. We got to really change the architecture. We got to progressively bring about changes. And any change, I agree with Pankaj Mittal that the taste of the pudding is in its eating. I mean, that's fine. But the fact is that, if you have wrong recipes, the taste is going to be bad. And therefore you've got to really control at the recipe level, and therefore I suggest that, what really brings the new policy on the agenda is very, very important. I'm not particularly against IT. I'm all for it, but I cannot see that substituting, a teacher in a classroom. I cannot really see that. It can perhaps bring in very many different kinds of experiences and values, but that needs to be deliberated upon, and therefore the online mode can be a temporary kind of a relief to this kind of a crisis that we are in, but it cannot be a permanent kind of a solution. So what do we really need to do? We got to really enhance the funding again, the government funding, the public funding in a situation like India. Where there is a lot of gaps, we got to really address that, between the margins of the country and the center of the country, the core and the periphery. There are enormous gaps. There are enormous gaps of social and economic nature. I'm not saying that economic deprivation is not the major problem. But then, we got to really put in, we got to bring in a lot of money there again. We have not been spending much. We have been spending less than 3% of the GDP on our education. There's a lot of scope for us to expand further, and therefore this is an opportunity. We've got to really spend. There is no trade. There cannot be a trade-off between health and education. That, you increase funding on health, we have not been spending much, more than 1% of the GDP on health. So, there is, together we should be spending close to about 10%, if not more. There's so much of opportunity for us to expand our expenditure, and, we got to ready. There's so much of a scope for young people to be brought within the fold of higher education, bring in their experiences, make experiences very rich. It's not a fairy tale. It's the real experiences that matters. Otherwise, you remain a segmented society. And that is what, if this state negotiates on the part of the powerful to create, then I would certainly protest for that. I would not be for it. And that's the point that I would like to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Sinha. It's always a pleasure to listen to you. So now we come to the end of round 2, and we'll now begin with the opinion and remarks of the discussants. So the discussants for today's program are Professor Pradeep Chaudhary, who is an assistant professor of economics of education at Zakir Hussain Center for Educational Studies, School of Social Sciences at Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. Secondly, we have Professor Binay Kumar Pathak. He holds a PhD from JNU and he teaches at Lalit Narayan Mithila University in Darbhanga in the state of Bihar. And Professor Khalid Khan, he holds a PhD in economics from JNU and is a research faculty at the Indian Institute of Dalit Studies, New Delhi. So over to you, Professor Pradeep Chaudhary.
Thanks, Simi. I think I'm audible. Am I audible?
Yes. Yes.
So first I should thank IMPRI for organizing this important talk, a timely talk on higher education. I congratulate Dr. Simi and Dr. Arjun for their effort on this. I have been asked to speak on the digital divide, which I think already being highlighted by few panelists, but still I will say a few words. I think that would be useful for the listeners. I think we all are aware about the existing digital divide in India. It's not the kind of COVID case that we are thinking on digital divide. It was been there for long, and several works on this even before this pandemic has been started. National sample, if you look at the National Sample Survey data, NSSO data, that is a national level data, that clearly reveals the fact. For example, according to the 75th NSSO round, if you see, that is in 2017-18, only about 18% of the students have a computer all over India. And there is a vast rural-urban divide on this, 9% for rural students and 32% for urban students. If you see the rich and poor variations, then it is as low as 4.5% among the poor households, quintile 1 households. And it is 47 to 48% among rich households. More or less similar figures you will get in access to internet also. Only 36% of the students have internet access in the country, 25% in rural areas and 52% in urban areas, 13% among poor households and almost 70% among rich households. So divide is very clear in the access to computer and also access to internet. If you look at only the students who are accessing higher education, this is overall. But getting into access to higher education, what we are talking today, the picture is not very different from this. Half of the students accessing higher education in India do not have access to internet. 52% do not have access to internet. And this figure is less than 30% among poor households. So it's very like, that means only 30% among poor households having, that means 70% having no internet access. There is also a wide gap in access to internet among students of different social groups. If you look at what Professor Sinha told, he has been working on social groups, disparity in social groups. 45% of scheduled caste, scheduled tribe students having access to internet only 45%. The rest 55% they don't have the access to internet. And it is almost close to 65% among general category students. If you see, these are some of the figures, but I want to highlight some of the anecdotes that is being found in media. If you see a case in Kerala that was highlighted in the media, that a girl climbed up to a tree to get access to the classes because there was no internet connection. So she climbed up to the tree and got the access. Similarly, you will find in Jammu and Kashmir, in northeastern states, students are climbing to hills to get class, to get their job done, to listen to their teacher's voice. So these are some of the anecdotes, and we cannot forget these anecdotes by simply saying that these are some specific cases. Rather, I would say there are several such cases in India which are not being coming out from the ground, and if such cases will come out, definitely we will have several interesting stories on this. So it is clearly an important thing that we should find out. So that's the point I want to say. In this context, given this background, what I am trying to do, very briefly, I will trying to bring 3 important points on this. Particularly, what I'm trying to do, if we bank on this teaching online or the digital mode of transaction, which is being what I found in my voice as a major policy initiative of the state. So this is a major policy initiative of the state. You can see in the recent times, and if you bank on this, the following problems I am finding. There will be several, but to my mind, I am like 3 important points coming very clearly at this moment, and I want to highlight that. Particularly if you practice this initiative even after the pandemic situation. So that's what the state is trying to do. It's not about only the pandemic, so it is going beyond pandemic also. That is the seriousness that I am trying to understand. First thing I want to find is the proportion of online teaching. The proposition of online teaching I found as a good marketing strategy, where state is withdrawing its responsibility and leaving it to the private sector and technocrats. So that's the kind of situation that is emerging in the online teaching. In the name of teaching learning, a systematic attempt is made. I found a systematic attempt is made to build a relationship between student and market, or parents and market. So the relationship between student and market is being stabilized over the years through online teaching. And online teaching is seen as a medium of strengthening the market and parent relationship, and state is being very neutral in this case. Very, very neutral in this case, I would say. So the pandemic, what I found, this pandemic is considered as an opportunity to capture the market quickly, to connect the education with the market quickly. So this is the thread that is going to connect market and education, which is quite dangerous. I must note that, I must say in this forum that this is going to be suicidal in nature, very dangerous in nature in the future. And the access to quality higher education we all are aspiring for, which is going to be far away. Because you understand the point. I don't think I have enough time to explain this, but I'm trying to that this is quite dangerous in nature, and that I think we all are going to face. Even rich are going to face. That's the point I'm to say. It's not about only poor are going to face this, even rich people are going to face. My second point is, and again, I think Professor Chattopadhyay and Professor Sinha told about our university, JNU and other places also. University or any higher education institution for that matter is an egalitarian space. That is being understood very clearly. And that would be questioned further in through this the kind of teaching learning that we are adopting, with the adoption of technology in teaching learning. In many cases, students consider campus as a unique learning space. Campus as a very unique learning space, particularly for the students who are from first generation learners, marginalized sections of the society. Staying in the hostel and interacting with their peers or friends and accessing to library, accessing to dhabas and all that, that manifold they are learning. That is very serious that is a very serious point that we are hiding. And getting out of the hostel almost stops their learning. In many cases I have seen that is stopping their learning. That is one thing. Students from poor households, first generation learners suffers the most in this process. And staying home put their learning off. I am trying to give one more example from my own experience. While I was taking a class in my course, one of the students who was taking the class, he was sitting under the tree in UP, and the temperature at that point of time in mid-June was almost 40 degrees. And he was trying to get the connection. When I asked why you are sitting there, it's too hot. He told this is the only way out to take the class because in my home, the network is very weak. So this is not a particular anecdote I am giving. There will be several such cases that will come out if you really hit the ground. If you really hit the ground, which we are not doing, we are hiding the situation. My third point will be changing to technology. I am afraid of if this kind of sudden change will have what I should say, like it will take out some students out of the system. Maybe there will be high dropout who will not be able to cope up with the system. It's not that everyone, if you give them computer, if you give them gadget through more financing, they will be adapting to it. It's very difficult. Many may not adapt to it. Slowly, their learning will decline. Once their learning is like they are not learning well, then they will be out of the system. That is another thing that we should think very clear. I will conclude by saying, I think I am on time. So I will conclude by saying, what's the alternative then? We are talking about the alternative. In many cases, what we find that the alternative is not very clear to none of us. Even nobody will say that what the alternative is. So this is a question that is being asked by many, but I don't think none of us having a good clarity on this or a good response to this. But we should be very aware that if we don't have a promising reply to a question, it doesn't mean that we should not question the question. We should always question the question, even if we don't have a promising reply. So that's what my point. We should question the system that is being developed with the state and market, and the relationship that is being developed with students and market through online teaching. That must be questioned, even if we don't have an answer at the moment. The state as well as the private sector should clearly come out with a specific strategy to handle the situation effectively, rather than sloganing or marketing the online education strategy when the students are at the most risk zone. The students are at the most risk zone. Students today are not the student 3 months in pre-March. So during the March to July, the students are of different kind. You should understand their mind, and then you should give them the learning, the kind of learning that you are imparting on them, rather than saying that online education will solve many of our problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Chaudhary, for also highlighting the consistency and other aspect, also university as a space, and also highlighting education as market. Many of the reports have recently come out and has also highlighted that Indian education sector have the market demand size of 350 million, 35 crores students. Higher education, our All India survey on higher education has a figure of around 50 to 60 million, 5 to 6 crores. So these are the new things also in the background of online education and public-private thing which we are seeing. And thank you so much, sir. And we'll come back again. There are many questions coming. Now I'll invite Professor Binay Kumar Pathak to make his remark. In the interest of time, sir, please try to be brief. Binay, sir.
Your mic is off, Professor.
Professor Binay, your mic, yes.
Am I audible now?
Yes, yes, good. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Arjun, for the kind invitation and organizing a timely event. I would start from the point of university as a space mentioned by my previous speaker, Dr. Pradeep. University has been a space for production, reproduction, and transmission of knowledge, but unfortunately, this online education has emphasis on transmission more than production and reproduction. And we know that there has been many changes in university systems, as Professor Manisha Priyam has highlighted, that this is not the new normal, this has been normal. There were efforts to embrace technology by universities. All universities have their websites. They use their websites to attract students, faculty, or future collaborators to showcase what they do. So this has been there. Even online courses were also there, and there were some interaction or collaboration between private players like edX, Coursera, where you can find courses offered by universities, and these are so-called top universities of the world. But then there has been a hierarchy in the education system. As my teacher, Professor Shaman Chattopadhyay, mentioned, I will use that. You can find a course on Coursera offered by Stanford University. Then there is a regular course offered by Stanford University. And we have been distinguishing between the two. We value the regular course more than the online course, which is available on platforms like Coursera. This has been the case. What I'm trying to point out is there has been different systems of or different ways of getting education. For example, open education, distance education. they have been there, but there is a certain kind of hierarchy or certain kind of recognition that we do, the brand value related with degrees. So students know what to do, the kind of students they are, depending on their purchasing power and their own capabilities where they can get into. So what is going to happen is this online education is going to add or is adding a new type of hierarchy in the system. Universities will remain, they have withstood many crises, they will remain, or the traditional mode of teaching learning will remain, but this is going to add a new dimension to the hierarchical system that we know. When this online education is going on in this system, Dr. Pradeep mentioned many struggles, instances of struggles of students that they are doing to access education. Even teachers are struggling from, moving from one platform to another platform to facilitate students. Even there are news reports, and some of my friends are even using WhatsApp, calling students to help them out so that they can make students understand a certain topic, and finding ways out different related to different subjects. For example, one colleague of mine who teaches math has bought a different instruments or different devices so that he can write. So teachers are also struggling and doing their bit. But then when these things are going on, there is an element of cost associated with it. And there are two kinds of costs I want to highlight. One is that an individual has to be students have to have some kind of device with them, an internet connection, and digital device has already been mentioned. And then there is a cost that is beyond individual. For example, speed of internet. We all suffer from poor speed. Even India is one of the poorest in this regard. In a report released in April mentions that India has slipped from 130 to 132. All of our neighbors except Afghanistan have better internet speed than us. So these costs are beyond us. This has to be borne either by the government or by the service providers. They are not doing it. They are utilizing existing infrastructure, which is very old, need to be replaced, replenished, but not happening. And we all suffer because of this inefficient system that we are into. So these types of costs are beyond our reach, which the government has to take serious note of if government intends to promote online education. And then lastly, again coming back to the point where I started, university space has been not only for students, has been a space for teachers also, where they can, a teacher has an authority in classroom when teacher can express freely. But what is happening in this online mode of education, teachers are monitored. Teachers can be monitored by parents, and there are news reports coming up when parents want to know what is going on, what the teacher is teaching. And during our present time, where we are highly politically motivated and the situation is so sensitive, so a teacher for higher education in social sciences, a certain topic that you are teaching, maybe which is very sensitive socially and politically, you can be reported that a certain teacher was teaching something else. So there are very many challenges that we are grappling with. But yes, the system is going to remain. We are ready, and the society has to undergo, and the government also has to think to facilitate the new system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Pathak. Quickly, we'll go to Professor Khalid Khan. Sir, please. Please try to be brief.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Arjun. Actually, I will discuss on the issues related which cut across the issue of financing, equity, and digital divide. Before actually touching what will be the future paradigm, how this crisis will lead to the paradigm shift, I think we should be aware of the features of higher education in India. Professor Chattopadhyay, he touched the issue of financing. Of course, this is a challenging issue. And I think, and when we are talking about the future scenario of higher education, we should look into the actually the ideology which government is trying to put forward. The period after 1991, the economic reform is different from the period before that. And when we are seeing higher education, I think we should see in the light of economic reform, the policy on education in 1992 and Punaya Committee report in 1993, which clearly mentions that about the efficiency in higher education, about fundraising by universities, and of course these are indications towards privatization. And during last 2.5 decades or 3 decades, we have seen successive committees where privatization has been justified. What Professor Chattopadhyay mentioned is actually the trade-off between commitment between higher education and health. I think I actually this is perfectly correct, because in the past also the government of India in reports have actually discussed that the commitment towards health is more important than commitment towards higher education. So this pandemic will be or may be an excuse for reducing budgetary commitments towards higher education, and of course health sector will be used as an excuse. The reason for this is also because of the theoretical justification for privatization, which I think the policy makers during post-reform period put forward, which is that they consider higher education as a private good, and they consider that it benefits the students who get it. So, and of course, if we see the data, for example, National Sample Survey, the share of private unaided institutions, which is actually profit-seeking institutions, the share has increased between 1995 and 2014. Its share has increased from 7% in total attendance to 33%. But what will be the impact of different groups, which Professor Sinha also mentioned, the impact on underprivileged groups? Then I think it's not straightforward that it is going to actually reproduce the conventional hierarchy. Because if we analyze NSS data, I have written one paper in Earth Vigyan on this particular issue. Then what we find between 2007 and 14, the access of OBCs has improved due to privatization. But this is not true for SCs and STs. This is not true, of course, for Muslims also, who are other underprivileged groups. So how the privatization is going to unfold, I think we have to analyze it at micro level, and we have to analyze it also because we have, I think 2 days before there was a report in Telegraph that government of India is planning to cut the OBC reservation into 3 parts. So this is the first thing I think I should say with regard to equity. But will it benefit? I am not intending to say that privatization is going to benefit the underprivileged group. No, it's not going to benefit. Because if we see the situation of SCs and STs, the marginalized groups or Muslims, and if we compare their access in publicly financed higher education and private sector, private unaided institutions, publicly financed higher education are inclusive. They are inclusive for SC, STs and Muslims also. They are inclusive for OBCs also. They are inclusive for weaker sections also. So this pandemic, due to the, is going to be excuse for higher education for the private for reducing commitment for higher education. This is again going to be excuse for involving private sector in providing digital higher education. But this digital higher education is going to add extra cost on the students, which Professor Pathak has mentioned. And other speakers have also, panelists have also mentioned, in terms of increased internet costs and increased computer cost and all these things. But when we talk about programs like e-Gyan or online learning, when we talk about that government is actually availing all the lectures online, of course it has the one concern is that it will be in terms of actually on the basis of unit cost, but even if it is free, it is going to be challenging, because university campuses are not actually, they are not only important just because they provide lectures to the students, they also provide social networks, they also provide cultural capital to the students, which becomes useful to survive in labor market. For any student coming from the weaker background, when they go to elite universities, they get the social network which ensures their survival in labor market. That's why it's also important that, because they are going to lose that those kinds of network which universities provide, particularly elite universities. And the third aspect is the situation of labor market itself. Does labor market, does education ensure high quality job? It is true, theoretically it is true, and it is true for other countries also, but for India it's not true. We have seen increasing unemployment rate among educated youths. We know that unemployment rate in India now is historically high. This is 6.1 and it is close to 8% in 2018. But if we analyze the unemployment rate among higher educated graduates, it is 18%, 16%, between 16% and 20%, depending on the group association. It is far higher than the overall unemployment rate, and it is again higher for the underprivileged groups. So when we are, I'm not denying the fact that higher education is important for the sake of knowledge, and higher education is also important for the sake of as a cultural activity, which even Sulj addresses in his own classic article. But higher education for a person coming from underprivileged groups, higher education, they take higher education, they demand higher education to ensure good quality job, to improve their income because of their background, because they have to actually, they have opportunity cost to face for joining higher education. So if they continue to remain unemployed even after getting higher education, then it's going to worsen their situation. And this digital divide, I think that it may further worsen the situation because of the lost social network, because of the cultural capital which they are going to lose. I think I should not extend my point.
Thank you.
But I think last point I think I should mention is that we should discuss these issues in details, and I will be happy if our teachers like Professor Chattopadhyay, Professor Sinha, or Professor Priyam actually, if they actually discuss these issues more detail in sometime in future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. We will surely, with their permission, organize some lectures. Thank you for highlighting many points, especially pertaining to labor market, the supplies, the demand side. Those who recruit often say that 80 to 90% are not employable, and also from the supply side there are matters on the issue that unemployment level of those who are graduate. For women, it is more than 1/3 the unemployment rate. So that is also a very important concern, and other issues. Now we will quickly we will extend our session to 10-15 minutes more, and quickly have a Q&A round. And now I'll straightforward go to Manisha ma'am. And one very important question which Manisha ma'am raised was of language. India is so diverse, and what should be the way forward in terms of this online education and the whole pedagogy in terms of language, which is, ma'am, if you can reflect something more. There are also questions. Simi, please collect all the questions raised to Manisha ma'am. Ma'am, also from Kothari Commission to in recent decade, we have talked of HERA, Higher Education Regulation Authority, then HEFA, Finance Authority. We also had something called World Class Educational Institution, where we were promoting 20 such universities to be the world class, and then ranking and all this. So if you can also reflect more on how this the whole political economy of universities and higher education is going, and what should the students, the current students, make their decision from this pandemic, ma'am. Simi, if you like to highlight the questions raised to ma'am.
Yes, yes. So thank you, Arjun. So there's a question for Manisha ma'am as to how does she visualize the arena of higher education juxtaposed with the challenges of digital divide, especially in the rural areas. So this is a question for you, and I would also like to briefly share the questions that are there for other panelists so that they can come up after Manisha ma'am's answer. There's a question to Professor Cliff as to how do you think that the US higher education will be dealing with, especially in terms of Trump administration's recent policy to not grant visas to the students who will be having online education in the current or in the upcoming semesters. And to Dr. Freeman, how do we integrate ourselves in the world of diversity where money matters in every walk of life? What are your thoughts on this? And there are several questions which have been answered by Professor Somin Chattopadhyay in the web chat box itself. And there's a question for Professor Dr. Abdulla Rasheed. Is that do you have any information on the innovations and the best practices in different universities that ensure the first two principles of UNESCO framework on continuing education, such as the right to ensuring higher education for all, leaving no student behind? And though there are many demand and supply side factors affecting these principles, how do universities remain the same? And for Professor Sachidanand Sinha, all the questions, and in fact, these are all comments from your end, from the attendees, and they have all agreed to what you say. So there are no questions per se for you. But there's a very important point that has been raised by an attendee from Philippines, that online learning in the country is almost impossible for their public schools because of various challenges, and they'll be introducing modular learning, deliver learning materials to students' houses. So how do you see this as a challenge amid COVID? Yes, sir. So Professor Manisha Priyam, over to you. Professor Manisha Priyam, are you there? Okay, so I think ma'am is okay. So Professor Cliff, we can have your remarks maybe by that time.
I don't see Manisha, yeah.
Yeah, I'll be glad to jump in. So on the first question about how universities will respond to the Trump administration, I got a real straightforward answer for you. I think they're going to sue. The policy is in my opinion foolish, and universities realize that, and I believe that there will be a bipartisan response to this as well, because they are economically hurting those universities, causing great stress for the students. And so just to keep my answer short, they're going to sue. It's going to be delay because of that, the tactic of the administration. It's going to land in the middle somewhere. I do not believe it will persist the way it is, because it's simply an unwise approach and policy, and rational minds will bring it somewhat back into the middle. By the way, I will note, I think Dr. Freeman might also have a perspective on this, being an active professor at university. I saved a little time because I like the question for Dr. Freeman about money matters, and how do you address digital equity when money matters? And I think some of the principles that we study in STEM and the Technopolis are very applicable to this. What we're doing in our community is looking at what's important to local industry, local government, to people with money, aligning with their interests, and then going to our underrepresented communities and bringing those experiences. When we do that, we have people show up with money, they're motivated, and it is a way to align the interests of the underrepresented groups with the economic interests in the city, all toward a moral end.
Right.
So, yeah, back
yes,
to you.
Thank you, Professor Cliff. But this certainly adds to the tensions and apprehensions of the students who were, in fact, preparing to start their education. So
it does, and it makes me very sad. You know, from many perspectives. One, from an educational perspective, I value education, and I know the personal impact that is having on students. I cannot begin to tell you too how foolish I think this is as a strategy of our government. You know, the United States has always been looked at a place as a destination for education, and it has worked in our interest for decades. That's another reason that I think cooler minds will prevail in the end.
Yeah, we are optimistic about that. Thank you so much.
Might as well be, yeah.
Professor Sidney, over to you.
Yeah, so I believe like Professor Cliff kind of actually addressed these questions well. I guess I would focus more on the political side of it rather than directly kind of address some of the nuts and bolts of it. I think that it's going to be important in the future to kind of see where our national elections go. So in November is the time when we will vote on who our president will be for the next 4 years. And I think that will have a major impact on educational policies across the board. And so a lot of it is a push in the United States to ensure that we get people out to vote and ensure that we have people that are supportive of access for all people to have access to education. As Professor Cliff shared earlier, our country has been a destination country, particularly for education. We have some of the best institutions in the world. And so I think, yes, online is a way of providing access to other countries to our educational system, but there's nothing like experiencing the face-to-face interaction with teachers and professors within a university environment. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next few years. I think a push for equity and justice is going to be key and important, and we'll see where it goes. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Freeman. Thank you very much. Dr. Abdulla, Rasheed, are you there? Your comments, please?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I'm here. So the question, the opportunities to implement UNESCO principles, isn't it? Providing equal opportunity and no student is left behind. In the Maldives, there is great opportunity for higher education. Actually, from the government, our president has a pledge to provide free higher education. So in the Maldives, up to first degree, it is free. So students just find placement from any university or any college from the Maldives, they can get a free degree. So in the Maldives, there is high potential for students to do their first degree in the country. So I can say in the Maldives, the UNESCO principle which I mentioned can be applicable easily. But as I said, the higher education sector in the Maldives is not as much as developed in other countries. We have limited national universities and private colleges, but most of the programs are available, but some areas are lacking, and most of Maldivian students go abroad. Maldivian students are there in United States, UK, Australia, Malaysia, Singapore, India, Sri Lanka, and other countries. But those who have decided to pursue their higher education within the Maldives, as I said, the scholarship opportunity is there to pursue higher education within the country free of charge. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Professor Sinha, if you could make your comments.
Yeah, you know, the only comment that I'm left with is the fact that, you know, we got to see universities as a real place of contesting ideas. And yeah, from points that perhaps people would like to pursue with their passion. So I think, you know, that's the opportunity which we are going to lose out once we are isolated, atomized in a manner that perhaps the online education perhaps do. And this has been my experience, a very limited experience, but this is the experience that I have had in the last 6 months. Second point, the point is, in India, our ancestors knew it very well, that if you are empowered with ideas, you can change the world. And therefore, your ideas should remain where you are and which class you belong to, because you are not supposed to have those ideas, right? So there is this, the point that I'm really trying to say is that, you know, certain classes of people have been enslaved to believe that they can't have ideas. And that's the point which is progressively being experimented with, and I have absolutely no qualms that it's going to create three kinds of people. People who would have education in universities, elite universities, whether in Harvard or in Delhi University or in Indian Institute of Science or in IITs, they will be talking about things, you know, how people eat in America, you know, or they would have such interesting topics to work on. And don't mind Sydney and Cliff, you know, if I have used something, you know, which is, well, you know, that's not absolutely, that's just the point that I'm really trying to, because we in India, we remained colonized for nearly 200 years. This is how the Europeans ate, you know, this is how you should start your dinner. You know, so we're so much.
So you just went on mute.
So we forgot the real dinner. The real dinner is that you are going to be enslaved. You know, your rights to your property, your rights to your resources is going to be taken away from you. While, you know, we are really trying to save our relatives out of the pandemic of COVID, you know, the government internationally, it's not only in India. Cliff, correct me if I'm wrong, that, you know, they went on to, in fact, allow in America an extensive area to be removed of the juniper forest so that it could be converted into a kind of a ranch land. And that's going to be a devastating kind of a proposition. Bolsonaro is doing it in Brazil, you know, somebody else will be doing it in Silent Valley in India. I mean, you just got to really replace people, you know. It doesn't matter whether it is Sachidanand, Sinha, or it is Simi. You know, it doesn't matter. You know, you can just place a people. We are just stooges in this entire chess game. You know, we are just the frontline soldiers. You know, we'll say, you know, inclusive, and we'll just do the opposite. So frankly speaking, I have absolutely no doubts. And I'm looking not at any kind of a situation which is very uncertain in the Indian context. COVID is going to be a situation of a neo-Brahmanism. Whatever it makes whatever it means, I can explain and I can defend myself. I'm not a political activist, but I can see the scenario from the rural experiences because I spend nearly 2 to 3 months every year in rural areas to the city of Delhi. The fact is that these people who were really allowed to move on as a consequence of their access to higher education have become too naughty. They have become too, look at the situation, why we were really talking about 100 days of free work, 100 days of paid work under Manrega. And people were so much opposed to it because they were not getting the free labor. So we are a country in India, we are really trying to really see this kind of a time squeeze and a time kind of a demarcation or time distance where people lived so many thousands of years under a kind of a feudal strategy of controlling labor. Now we have a very good way of controlling labor. Everybody should not become educated. Everybody should be tested at different stages. Look at the new education policy. Class 3, there will be a census test. Class 5, there will be a census test. Class 8, there will be a census test. What is this census test all about? If you ask me even today to appear for a test, I will have my blood pressure going up. Come on, a young child being asked to appear for a test tomorrow or a day after, and so you have to constantly instill that fear of test. You are not good, not good, not good, and therefore you belong to the slave category, and somebody belongs to the category of the master. So we have, with the help of people, who really created that great nation called the United States of America, which really abolished slavery. But, yes, you may have abolished slavery, sir, but in fact, you have more slaves there. We may have abolished, we may not have actually abolished slaves here, but some of us are free radicals. We could be thinking out of the box, but the system really doesn't accept us. So there's a neo-Brahminism, which is coming as a kind of a cloistered box, which will set us all right. Only some of the Brahmins who are born to a Brahmin can think, can have education, and the rest of you will remain slave. And take it, Impact and whatever that institute is, write it down for all times to come. You are not going to get out of it unless and until you stop smiling and say, okay, this is wrong, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. It was very passionate indeed. Professor Somin, if you have any brief remarks at the conclusion, if you would like to.
Yeah, just
speak.
1 or 2 sentences.
Yes, please.
I think in the name of rapid advancement in digital technology and globalization, universities should not cease to exist. However, universities should evolve to contribute to the social and economic order, given the context that we are trapped. Thank you.
Rightly so. Yes. So now, thank you very much. We have extended for over half an hour. I would just invite Dr. Arjun Kumar to make a quick vote of thanks, and we'll then formally end. Dr. Arjun Kumar, over to you.
Thank you. We'll just check once again with Professor Manisha. Ma'am, if you are there. No, she is here, but
busy.
Response नहीं आ रहा है sir.
नहीं कोई बात.
Okay. No, thank you, sir. We will talk more. In fact, Boston Brahmins and so many things is there in USA. Perhaps we'll have some lecture on that, Sinha sir. Thank you. Now I would like to propose a vote of thanks. Thank you everyone for coming. I would also like to thank Professor JBG Tilak. He has some medical emergency at his home, so he is.
I'm so sorry, I didn't see him. I wanted to see it. Yeah.
I actually asked him to chair for this very important panel.
Oh, wonderful. He would have been an excellent person to be with. You know?
Yes, sir. And then also Mr. Amit Khare. the Secretary Higher Education. Today, again, I spoke, but they are so busy in the NEP, and also Professor V K Malhotra, I just spoke. He has also got the draft of NEP and in fact busy into that. So I thank all of them, those who were not able to join. And I thank from the bottom of my heart all of you who have joined. Professor Manisha, Priyam, thank you so much. Professor Cliff, thank you so much always. It's overwhelming to be guided by you again and again. And Dr. Abdulla, Rasheed, Ahmed, thank you for taking out time and also giving the perspective from Maldives. Professor Sydney Freeman Jr., thank you so much for again coming to our program and highlighting these very important aspects. I also thank you for co-organizing this event, and thank all the officials at University of Idaho, and we hope to do more events together. And however, we are not getting very much time to prepare such because of the pandemic situation in India is not that great. Thank you so much, Professor Sydney again. Professor Pankaj, Mittal again, thank you ma'am for joining us today and finding out time. And Professor Somen Chattopadhyay, thank you so much sir, again very short notice. But in a very crisp manner, you have highlighted all the very pertinent points. I have noted down 3-4 pages of notes, but we don't have time. But many aspects, especially economic aspects, and
money matters.
Money matters, and many especially going on. But I will try to cover those in our lectures and our discussants. Professor Pradeep Kumar Chaudhary, also as my elder brother, Professor Khalid Khan again, and Professor Vinay Kumar Pathak. Thank you so much for discussing these nuances every day and forcing us to hold such a important event and throughout guidance. And finally, I would like to thank my local guardian here in JNU, Professor Sachidanand Sinha sir, and for encouraging us. In fact, why the university is important, because Sachi sir's lecture used to be very long conversations, but not the boring ones, but highlighting these very important points. In fact, most of the comments we have got in Q&As here and also in Facebook, I think most of the people in digital world are with Sachi sir, that it is. So even the digital world, Sachi sir's argument is getting such a traction. We'll go forward with it, and I hope that we are able to organize in coming months special lectures on these things, and I would invite all of you to contribute and also enlighten on these very critical and crucial issues, especially at this juncture and time of change. And once again, I would also like to thank organizers from our team, Professor Balwant Singh Mehta, Professor Somen Chattopadhyay, Professor Nitin Tagde, Professor Khalid Khan again, Dr. Simi Mehta, Anshula Ritika, and Apurva, and many IMPRI team, IMPRI IT team also. Thank you so much. Simi, final word to you. And yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to everyone for attending this very important discussion. So I would just request at the end, all the panelists, if you could turn on your cameras so that we can take a group photograph.
Yeah, my camera is on.
Yes. Yes.
But I'm not so photogenic.
You look just perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, do modify it. You know, you have online instruments to modify it.
Fishing for comments, Professor Sinha.
Hey, I just got a picture after somebody told that joke. Everybody was smiling. It was perfect.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
So Simi, you have to tell a joke before you take the picture.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Have a good evening.
Have a very good day.
And have a good day, Professor.
Bye,
everybody.
Thank you, Cliff.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's very, very good to see or meet all of you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.